I am wanting to know what you think, Nick, about after a breakup, should you unfollow the person or not?
Yeah, this is a situation I think we've all been in at some point, right? We have a breakup, um, and we're feeling all sorts of emotions about the breakup, and then there's this vestige of the relationship, which is like all of a sudden there's just pictures popping up of your ex, and often those pictures are performative in some way, right? Or like even aggressive at for certain people. So I think, yeah, the question becomes, what is best? Like in the context of breaking up with somebody, is it better to unfollow them, at least temporarily, or not?
Yeah, so you're talking specifically about like pictures that you're seeing on social media. So unfollowing on social media, right? Because pictures can also just pop up in your photographs and all kinds of things, right? But so we're
Yeah.
specifically talking about social media.
Hmm.
And in the article that you wrote, you talked about, there's different parts of ourselves. So it's never just like, it never feels totally clearly. Well, maybe it does for some people. Maybe it's super clear at the beginning, and yay for that.
Yeah.
Most people waffle. And so, can we talk about like some of those different parts of ourselves
Yeah.
and why we want to kind of listen to them because they each part of us has a legitimate need and want, right?
Yeah. So a breakup is a time when a lot of our parts get activated, right? Like it's such an intense thing to go through. It can bring up like past family stuff around abandonment, rejection, whatever. So a lot of our parts are up. And so it's not surprising that this becomes a really hard decision for people, whether or not to unfollow or even block on Instagram or other platforms. So I mean, let's just go through some of the parts that come up for people, right?
Yeah.
I think like the first one that I listed in the article is like the part that doesn't want to come off as petty, that unfollowing seems like a thing, right? And you're trying to be the one who's like more unaffected, right?
Really. I mean, I think there's kind of, I really can, everything we're going to talk about, I can relate to. But I think in this particular thing, it's like you want to leap to being okay. You want to be okay yourself, but you also want to appear to be okay. I think there's, rightly so, there's a part of us that wants to say, you didn't lay me flat. I'm fine without you, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So wanting to come off unaffected or trying to convince yourself internally that you are okay, right?
Exactly. Which is sort of what you have to do. That's a little bit of the process, you know?
Mhm, mhm, mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, the next part is the part that's a little more, I guess, passive aggressive. It's the part that wants out on top, that might continue to follow somebody in order to make posts that create the projection that you're doing just fine, right? Or that you are the one who is leaving in a superior position.
Yeah. Yeah. I like getting on top too.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, and again, like even that decision, it's sort of like what we just talked about, but that decision is coming from a genuine care of self, but and also like what I want to communicate, right?
Yeah, I think as therapists, like this part, I have noticed in my work, like really gets in the way of people moving on, getting out of bad relationships, right? Or not even bad relationships, but maybe just a relationship that wasn't quite right for you. Like the need to get out on top can be a really difficult energy to deal with, like when you're actually just trying to like move on or figure out
Yeah.
how to process. Mm.
Well, when we go through these things, then we can talk about what we really truly recommend, right?
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so the next one is the part that doesn't want to stir conflict further by setting a boundary. This is a big one.
Yeah, it's, setting a boundary feels, especially if you're not very good at setting boundaries, it
hmm
feels quite aggressive and almost a little bit scary. But,
hmm
you could feel like, oh, there's going to be some retaliation.
Right.
So even if you're setting a boundary in and you just have kind of like loving intent, mostly for yourself, because that's where your focus should be, but also just like, hey, I think this is the best thing to do. You don't know how it's really going to come off. It can be hard, I think.
Yeah. I think what we often say to our clients is there's the discomfort of setting the boundary, but actually like the most loving thing you can do is actually like put down the boundary if you need it, even if there is that like discomfort. I mean, that ultimately that is the most loving thing.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah,
Um, then there's the part that wants to violently cut off contact, right? Contact is angry about the breakup, and so might want to unfriend, block, just like really sever.
yeah.
Mhm.
Well, I guess when you're saying that, this is not so much my experience because it's just not generally the way I go. But as you're saying that, you know, again, it's like setting a boundary or severing. It's just kind of like the energy behind it, right? It's like,
Mhm.
where are you coming from and how can you care for yourself in this moment? I mean,
Mhm.
I guess
Mhm.
when you're being very violent and you're like slashing and burning,
Right,
you know,
right, right.
uh,
And I think this, yeah, sorry.
no, go ahead.
I think this part kind of stems from typically from like attachment trauma where talking through something, like actually setting a boundary with words in the past, like just didn't go well. Like your parents or whoever just like couldn't handle that boundary setting with words. And so there's a need to just like violently sever as the only way to like separate, right? And have your space respected.
Definitely, definitely. Yeah.
Um, there's the part that wants to transition to friendship right away. And I see this as like the part that is wanting to be like almost, I would use the word almost enlightened, right? Like that we can just go from we love each other and we can go from being in a relationship to friendship seamlessly. And I think you hear people say this to their friends often, like, "Oh yeah, we broke up, but we're friends, like we're friendly." And sometimes that is true, and sometimes people are capable of that. Like if it's been more of a partnership for a long time, and maybe that transition is like a little more seamless. But I think oftentimes there's like a bypassing that this part does.
Yes. I totally agree with you. I mean, I do think, you know, it's a leaping to where I want to be in the future. And I don't want to go through all the shit I have to go through and
Yeah.
all the feelings I have to go through to get there. I just want to go there right now, right?
Right, right, right. So in our IFS perspective of having these many parts, like other parts of you would view that energy as like abandoning, right? Like, oh no, there's so much stuff that we have to go through to get there, and you're just wanting to cut all that off and get there. There can be a little bit of violence in that.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Okay, so the next one is the part that consciously wants to cling to the love that you once had, right? Like, so maybe there's like this hope that if you keep following and keep liking each other's content, and then maybe eventually you'll start like DMing and rekindle. Again, there's like a little bit of a lack of acceptance that like it has ended, that like there's a strategy to kind of like slowly get back together.
Right, right. Yeah. I'm I think, again, we have to sort of think of those parts. That part also is trying to be in a space of love. Like that part is trying so hard, right? So I think that this exactly why this whole thing is confusing is because these parts that are kind of wanting to stay in touch, wanting it to be good. I mean, it's really coming from it's kind of like that young self that is just very hopeful, but also dependent, and
Mhm,
afraid to let go. So let's not go to the fear. Let's just go to the hopeful, loving place.
mhm, mhm. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I
Oh,
think Yeah, yeah, there's so much. It's just hard. These situations are hard. We've all been through them.
You
Um,
know, Nick, there is not anything worse than a breakup. I mean, death, perhaps, but breakups are really, really hard. So, yeah,
yeah, it brings up a lot of old stuff and a lot of current stuff. The last part that we're going to cover is just the part that actually it's a little bit more of a maybe mature or adult part. It knows that the relationship wasn't right and it actually wants to move on. Not to say that like it wasn't right forever, or maybe it's just that it wasn't right in this form, but there's like a knowing that you need space and that you need to accept that it has ended. And this part gets hijacked a lot by other parts that say like, no, wait, like I want to cling to it, or I want my ex to suffer because they've caused me pain, right? And at the same time, this part is there just kind of like advocating for you to actually go through the process, I think, of grieving.
yes, definitely. I think there's kind of, I think people who suffer more from codependence have a harder time with this, because it's a real, the decision to just truly care for yourself and let go of that person,
Mhm.
you have to be fully independent. And and that's hard for a lot of people, right?
Yeah. I mean, I guess I want to say to that part that like you don't have to be full, like you can rely on other people to help you through that process, like you can
Yeah.
be still in connection while accepting that this one connection is not working at this time, but I definitely hear you how hard that is to
Yeah.
actually accept.
Yes, I mean, and that's probably like of the top, like it's probably like top five things of how to recover from a breakup. And probably, definitely one of them is connecting with your friends. If it like keep connecting and keep growing your other relationships, right?
Yeah, yeah. So those are some of the main parts that come up. Um, when you've had a breakup, you're wondering whether or not to stay connected on social media. These are some of the parts that we often see and that we often experience. And there are so many more that you could have, like we have so many, all of us have so many unique parts. And so this is just like some of the common ones that we hear and see. It kind of leads us to land on like our recommendation, which at least this is my recommendation because I wrote the article, and Megan, I would be curious if you agree, which is that I think it's a pretty clear case of that, yes, you should unfollow. And the reason I say that, it doesn't have to be a permanent unfollow, doesn't have to be a block, but the reason I say it is because a breakup is a grieving process. It's going to be a grieving process, whether that means you're going to eventually go back to that person, or the relationship's going to shift in some way, or you're going to become friends. There's still a grieving of like this intimate relationship that was in its current form. And so when you stay connected and you're sort of bombarded with pictures or videos or like things that they've written, it sort of hijacks the natural grief process that's taking on. And I equate it to like leaving your front door unlocked, right? Like and your ex, or maybe your ex just has your key and can just like pop in unannounced as you're maybe going through a rough time. Suddenly your ex just like pops in, and that can just hijack the process because our mind wants to help us to avoid pain. That is like, I think our mind's like primary goal in many situations, just helping us to avoid pain. And so if your mind feels like, oh no, I don't have to go through this, it's going to find ways to not go through it. And being connected to your ex on social is like one of those primary ways that it can avoid the process of grieving, which is really ultimately not what you want. It doesn't leave you in a place of like being able to make a decision, like getting clarity and being able to make a decision about what you want moving forward, because you haven't actually gone through that process. So are you on the same page, Megan? Is there anything you're wanting to change in
Oh,
that?
I actually am. I'm in total agreement with you. And I think, and for a couple of other reasons, which I'll add, is, I think the brain has to get used to not seeing that face. And I think it's like, I just think that your brain and your body actually need to be separated so that you can create a life where that person is not a part of it. And that really takes time. And the other thing that I'll say is that I think every time, if you're still following them, it can be masochistic a little bit, um,
Mhm.
and sort of obsessive too, like the need to sort of know what they're doing, how they're doing. Maybe we're doing it because we want to feel angry at them, and it's like, but that all of that is continuing to engage in a relationship and just slow us down. Hey, nobody's perfect, right? And so the breakup process is going to be, nobody's going to do it perfectly.
Mm.
Lovingly unfollow and start the grieving process in a beautiful, like, it's hard, but to be kind to yourself probably means to unfollow, right?
Yeah, you in our discussions around this, you first you mentioned that masochistic part. That's like a whole nother part that we could cover, right? Um, but you mentioned just like this idea of starving the problem in our talks about this. And can you just say a little more about that?
Yeah, yeah. Thanks for reminding me. Um, I think actually this is a great psychological technique um, to use in a lot of areas, but in this particular one, uh, as I said, the brain you're used to seeing this face every day, let's say, right? And the brain wants it. And because the brain likes to do what it does, like the brain doesn't really like creating new roads. It just
Right.
likes repeating. It's like you think the same things, you do the same, like it likes routine. So if we starve the problem, meaning it's a pretty quick unfollow. And I even told clients to practice not speaking their name for a period of time, which means we're really like every time it comes up, I'm not going to put it into play. I'm not going to keep living a life where I'm looking at this person, I'm talking about this person, and it kind of forces you to redirect, right? And I've actually, clients have had really good success with that because they just recover faster, right?
Hmm.
We call that starving the problem. If the problem is, over focus on an ex or somebody or anything really that's giving you a hard time, get out of
Yeah.
there.
Yeah. Right. I think that there's a metaphor for that that I've found to be helpful in the past of like the groove that your brain gets caught in the familiar groove. I like a ski trail is something that always resonates for me. Like that you just keep going down the same trail because it's like, well, there's a nice easy groove there.
Yes.
And how do you get into that fresh powder? Not like I'm a big skier, but like how do you get into those fresh paths, right?
That's such a great metaphor because honestly, it's scary to do a fresh path. I'm
Yeah.
not a skier, so that's not very scary, but
I was a skier when I was younger, and then yeah, now it's like it's too much work. I think the last thing I'll say is like if you can unfollow with grace, that you can actually reach out and say, I need this time to go through this process, and so I'm going to unfollow you. Please don't take that as an attack. Um, and maybe ask them if they would like to unfollow you too. So that your pictures aren't like you don't have in the back of your mind that when you're posting they're seeing it.
yeah,
But you can do
or
it with grace. There is the possibility of doing it with grace in most situations. Some situations no.
I agree. Thanks, Nick.
Thanks.